This is Anthony Boyle with Seacat Pest Management out of Burlington, Iowa, and you're listening to the best podcast in the industry, the Pest Geek Podcast with Frank Hernandez.
Pull out your hose and grab your can. We're about to integrate another Pest Geek Podcast. Hi, everybody. Frank Hernandez here, and welcome to the Pest Geek Podcast, bringing you the latest information on pests, products, and politics from today's leading industry sources to help you start, manage, and grow your pest control business.
Hey, welcome back. Welcome back to another edition of the Pest Geek Podcast. I am your host, Frank Hernandez, here every day discussing all things pest. And I want to remind everybody to join the Pest Geek Society. Join the revolution of what's happening in the pest control industry. Join us on Facebook, Pest Geek Podcast Listeners Group. We're also on Twitter. We're on YouTube, pestgeekpodcast.com. Join us. Join in on the conversation. Let us know how we're doing. Let us know what you need to be more successful. Contribute, engage. And now here's Jeff McGovern with today's topic.
Why, thank you, Frank. Folks, this is Jeff McGovern, the Pest Coach. And today I wanted to talk a little bit about fly control. Last week, I had a PMP contact me in reference to that. And I thought, it's getting warm outside. Maybe we ought to talk about flies a little bit, but not necessarily as far as the standard control methods that we use. Because with fly control, you really have to take a look at penetration issues. Because when you see a whole bunch of very successfully deployed fly traps inside of a building, and all those glue boards are full of flies, we've already got a problem because we have penetration issues going on. So we have to figure out why that's occurring. Now, if you're going out to, let's say for the first time, review an account for fly control, you might want to take a quick look at Google Earth right from your own office, or of course nowadays from the vehicle, on the computer, on the phone. But take a look at Google Earth and see what surrounds the building that you're going to be taking over for fly control. Because what we do as structural pest control folks is take care of structures. We don't do fly control for the planet and the outside. So people are paying us to keep these creatures out of the places that they live or work or dine in. So let's take a look. You open up Google Earth, find out where you're going, and take a look at the area surrounding it and keep going out a little bit. Because it may be 5 miles away, there's a chicken production facility, there's a horse farm, there's a ranch, there's some type of a building or other structure or piece of ground that's producing a huge amount of flies. And what if the prevailing winds are blowing in the direction of the structure or structures that you're responsible for? Holy cow, that may be where the fly problem is coming from. So try to find those things first so you have some idea of the pressure your client is getting. And certainly, if your client is a commercial account and has an outside trash area, a dumpster corral, or something like that, when the flies arrive, they're going to be really comfortable because there are outside recreation areas for them to live in and dine in. And then the next thing to do is penetrate the structure because it's close, and maybe there are delightful odors coming out of there. Maybe the structure is warm and comfortable and they're not. So they're going to head in that direction. Now, with regards to the building itself, over the years, one of the things I've noticed is that these insects are going to be attracted to what's different. So for sake of example, a giant shopping center full of all these different businesses, maybe the grocery store that you're servicing has an outside service area on the back, and they've got it covered to make it more convenient for their employees to work outside and bring in merchandise and work with the truck. That creates a shadowed area that's a little cooler in the heat of the summer, and the flies move right into those areas. And then once the flies get into those areas, if there's not proper door controls, they're going to go right inside the building. So you have to understand the pathways that the flies use to enter the structure, and sometimes it is so subtle. I remember one incident that we had actually in California, where we had a beautiful subdivision with horses and small ranchettes, and right adjacent to that on another piece of property was a beautiful new shopping center with some of the most magnificent stores and architecture you've ever seen, and they were getting hammered with flies. And one of the penetration issues we found was there was a horse property right behind the shopping center, a little bit downhill. The back of the shopping center, the store we were responsible for, was all secured, so to speak, on the back, except for a couple of high entrance areas where you walked up a set of steps and entered into the store through big double man doors. Those doors were not sealed properly at the base, and they had a gap on them of about a half an inch right inside the store, and the flies were just zipping through those zones. And then when the flies came in through the back, because they sold food at this particular location along with hard goods, the flies came up into the back area, and the next thing that they saw were these big windows on the doors that opened from the stockroom onto the selling floor. And those windows were all bright because of the sunlight coming in the front of the store. And so what was happening, the flies were coming in the back, seeing those windows, flying toward those windows. People were opening and closing the doors all the time. They were lightweight. The flies would go toward the front of the building because of the sunlight coming through the beautiful front doors and glittering and shiny. Off to the side up front was the cafe area. Now, the front of the store had beautiful controls as far as flies. They had double entry doors. It was well sealed. There was good control. But they came through the back, and that caused an issue. They went into the cafe. Once we identified the problem at the back, we had solved the problem at the cafe, and it wasn't any number of fly machines or anything that were going to be installed. It was simply putting seals on those back doors. And by that same token, in areas like that, with agricultural situations, they have trash areas at the back of the store. You may want to consider adding something along the lines of an FBS fly station to the areas at the rear. Excuse me. And when I say adding those FBS stations, those are fly bait stations from VM Products. Very, very good devices for putting out fly baits. But what you'll want to do is let the flies tell you where to put them. Do the observation in those trash areas at the back of the building. You're going to get the pressure anyway from adjacent properties. You can't really keep that away, but you can intercept a lot of those insects in the areas they're already attracted to at the back by strategically placing those stations. And when you place those, you want to put them in areas where the flies congregate. If you just stick them up on the wall willy-nilly, they're going to be in an area that maybe it gets too hot, or maybe there's too much breeze there, because flies will tell you where they're comfortable and where the dead air spaces are. Try to put the stations adjacent to those zones, because when flies approach a building, when they move into an area, they're going to want to find the most comfortable places. They're just like us. They don't want to sit out in the hot sun. It's uncomfortable. They don't function properly. So what they're going to do is find the areas where the temperature is the most comfortable, the air movement is less, so they're most comfortable, and there's moisture in a food supply. So if you put the stations in those zones, you're fine. But to look at that structure as a whole again, let's say we have penetrations at the front of the building. You really need to spend time and figure out where the penetrations truly are. In the case that I mentioned, we figured it was the back. In other situations, I've seen it be the front, but I've seen the fly penetrations taking place because of the activity from the human beings that are in the building. Case in point, I had a situation come up in Mississippi a number of years ago at another beautiful commercial facility recently opened, and they were screaming about the failure of the fly machines to cure the problem. So I went ahead and flew out there. Sure enough, the fly machines were jam full of flies. The glue boards were packed. So therefore, they weren't working properly because they weren't taking care of the problem. Of course, the fly machines were also in the wrong place, even though they were packed. That's a whole different issue. But I went ahead and sat down at the cafe in the front of the store because I knew that I needed to observe what was really happening. And as I sat down, I wanted to kind of blend in, so I had my drink, and I'm sitting there, and the flies are landing on the tabletops, and I could see, oh my God, this is terrible. Well, how were they actually getting there? And I'll bet you I wasn't sitting for more than 10 minutes, and here come a couple of healthy young men, and they had T-shirts on with the name of the store emblazoned across the T-shirts. Now, mind you, this store had a double entry front door system. So there was an airlock system at the front. So I had observed this pretty carefully. Well, there was also a cart tunnel in the middle of those double door sections with its own set of doors. So as I sat there watching these two young men, I watched them open the first door that let them into the airlock area. They tied the door open with a bungee cord. They then went to the second door, and they tied the door open with a bungee cord. Then they both went out in the parking lot to gather shopping carts in this huge parking lot. I mean gigantic, with hills and valleys. And you know what? The entire hour and a half that I sat there and made my notes and got things together, those doors were propped open because they were outside gathering shopping carts and shoving them into those openings. That's where the flies were coming from. The other thing that'll happen with shopping carts is the flies will be all over the carts, and you push them right inside the building and they get loose. And that's something where you have to be concerned with the condition of the carts and cleanliness. But it's human conditions causing the penetration, and it was overloading the fly machines on the inside. In that particular case, we completely solved the fly problem by simply making some adjustments to the way they gathered shopping carts. The population on the inside plummeted. It went from catching hundreds and hundreds of flies in the fly traps to a daily catch rate of maybe 20 in all the fly traps in the dining area from that point on. And that was an acceptable level. The other thing you want to look at when it's situations like that at the front of buildings, where are they putting the trash cans? Because those little fly magnets, if they're too close to the door, the insects are going to penetrate with the shoppers. And a lot of times those penetrations are not up high because they do have the air curtains there, but the air currents aren't adjusted properly. And they're also clogged up in the filters, and they don't blow like they should. And there's penetration issues down at the lower edges of the airflow. So look at situations like that as well. The other thing we've done with fly control in those penetration situations with the pockets at the front of the store, with those areas like an airlock, is we've done applications on the windowsills at the inside edge of the front windowsills. So when the flies come in, they make a turn, in some cases all over that glass, drop down to the windowsill, and control measures on that windowsill help reduce the numbers of insects. In some areas, you could use a contact insecticide there. In other areas, we simply installed camouflage window traps in those zones and were successful. So there's a lot that you need to look at with regards to flies. I have touched on a tiny portion of that in the last 10, 15 minutes or so. And there's a lot more we can certainly cover, but I want to keep this short. So make those observations first as to the actual conditions going on, and take some time to figure out what people are really doing. And the last story I'll talk about is a simple small grocery store that we had in my home state of Florida. And we walked into the front and we were greeted by a manager screaming at us because of the flies, and it was our fault, and we needed to spray, fog, bomb, bait, hammer the place, put up more fly traps. When we walked to the back of the store, we noticed that there was a man door propped open with a rock. Well, it turned out that they had a lot of smokers in that store and they couldn't smoke inside. So they would prop open this one man door at the back with a rock. As the manager said, well, it's only open maybe 5 or 6 inches. Why would that cause fly problems in the front of my store? Well, when you walked outside that man door, there was also a small covered area for people to sit and relax. They spilled things on the ground. They created a group of happy, active flies right there. And that 6-inch opening may as well been the opening to the Holland Tunnel. And the insects flew right in, were attracted to the front of the store, and ended up in all the production areas. No amount of fly machines would have ever solved that. It was simply solved by taking away the rock. So take a look at the situations you get involved in and try and figure out what the penetration zones truly are for flies. And I think you'll be a lot more successful. And so with that, this is Jeff McGovern, the Pest Coach. And Frank, I'll turn it back to you. Take care.
We hope you have enjoyed this edition of the Pest Geek Podcast. Have a pestacular day.
Thank you for listening to the Pest Geek Podcast. If you have enjoyed the Pest Geek Podcast, please give us a rating, write a review, or subscribe to the channel. You can join the Pest Geek Society by visiting pestgeekpodcast.com. Thank you for listening. See you next time.